Aitzquachil, Siam Nastelicha Siam, Quanstanat Sinasnat. Good morning, friends and family. I am Candace Wilson from Lummi Nation. I am the Executive Director for the Lactamish Foundation. We welcome you today. We would love to share with you about our story and who we are as the Lactamish people, the people of the Salish Sea. We are Waklami, Lummi people. We reside on the beautiful shores of the Pacific Northwest, the northernmost tribe of Washington State, and aligning with our relatives in the First Nations of Canada, British Columbia. Today, we will share with you part of our story, who we are, where we come from, and where we're going. We can't do this without you and your help. We have been here since time immemorial, and we will be here for perpetuity. Today, these stories that we share evolve from the treaties and federal Indian policy that were actually designed and developed for termination, to terminate the Indigenous people. We'll speak to racism, discrimination, and historical trauma, where the recent recovery of the children in Canada from the boarding schools, where every child matters, we want to bring them home, where missing and murdered Indigenous women are real, where 1 in 4 is sexually assaulted and 1 in 10 is murdered. Not only is it difficult to evolve and to survive through COVID-19, but the real crisis to us right now is the opioid crisis. We have more people dying from the opioid overdoses than we do with coronavirus. Throughout this last year and a half, the Lactamish Foundation, the Waklami Resilience COVID-19 integrated community response has evolved. It designed us, we didn't design it. What we have been able to do is to help organize our community and our services that come together to help promote and educate our community about COVID-19 with the good work and the help from the public health team and the Lummi Tribal Health Center, Lummi Indian Business Council. There's several ways that you can help. One of them is to take a moment and take some time away from this session and look at the resources that are available on Children of the Setting Sun Productions. They have a production of What About Those Promises? These are the stories of the Waklami people and the treaty signing and how we have evolved since then. There's other resources such as Northwest Washington Indian Health Board that helps guide us in our communities, our tribal communities here in the North Sound. And then there is the since time immemorial curriculum that we are helping, the Lactamish Foundation is helping our Lummi language department provide the resources and the materials with the help of our culture department for the public schools and the curriculum that helps educate all of our children, not just the Indigenous children, but all of our children. This is a mandate by the state of Washington that didn't have funding to supplement the resources. But you can help. We will help educate all of our people because we are still learning. Our language, our teachings, and our traditions were taken from us. We didn't grow up learning who we are, but now we have that chance, and you can help. So, without further delay, I'd love to introduce to you Lummy's very own, my dear relative, Dr. Dakota Lane. Hi, Shka.
Thank you, Aunt Candy. As many of you may know, that a lot of us out at Lummi were in many ways related. And so Candace Wilson and I are related on the Lane side. And I know certainly she has, we've seen each other at multiple family gatherings, so it's an honor to have her introduce me. I will just jump in. I think that's a great introduction by Candace. It kind of sets the stage. So let me just jump in and first off, thumbs up, you guys can hear me? Yep, okay. And another thumbs up, you can see the presentation. Okay, great. So without further ado, I'll just jump right into this. Peace Health Equity Conference. Today is July 29th. Let's see. I unfortunately have no conflict of interest. I put a picture of me there getting my first vaccine, not really related to this, but I think it's an important day for me, December 17th. I'll never forget it. That's the COVID vaccine. I think it's fun to put pictures up here. Objectives. So I'll do a quick introduction. We'll jump into kind of a patient story that I often hear is kind of a consolidation of a bunch of patient stories. To fully understand some of the things that Candace Wilson just described, the historical trauma, kind of all of those, historical things that we have faced as a community, is best to start with where it all started. So that's a brief history of Indian treaties and health services. I'll talk briefly about the Lummi tribe and culture. And just as Candace had mentioned, the opioid epidemic, and then Lummi healthcare, and then that'll be it. So a little bit about me. I am a Lummi tribal member. I'm also a C-Home graduate. I'm also an electrical engineer, graduated in 2003 from UW. I am a high school teacher from, I served as a high school teacher in Peace Corps, Malawi. That is me, the only non-Black person in Malawi. It's weird to be in that position. You can see I was attempting to grow my hair out. That was in 2003. I went to medical school at Cornell, graduated in 2013, did my family medicine residency at Halifax, Florida, which is where the residency that serves Daytona 500. I am now the executive medical director and recently now serving on the Peace Health Community Board. Okay, let's just jump right into it. Patient's tragic health story. Obviously, I modified the age and history so to protect patient's identity. In this case, this literally happened yesterday. An adult woman came into this clinic, specifically sought me out because I won't be racist to her. She was referring to all of the medical facilities she interacted with in Bellingham. She was initially seen by our clinic psychiatrist, who had been assisting with her medications, recommends the patient see me. And of course, this is the first thing she asked for is Suboxone and clonazepam refill. Obviously, those are, as a provider, your first thing, when you hear that, when you first meet a patient, it's always not, we always reflectively get defensive. She was visibly obtunded during our conversation. She was struggling to stay awake, but she was lucid. I asked her a question, she would respond in a recent, an appropriate way. Then I sit down, I say, okay, well, let me see what I can do. Tell me more. She then proceeds to tell me her life story. She describes being raped for years. as a child by her mother's boyfriend, while her mom struggled with addiction. She was disowned by her family, and when she came forward by this rape, she had been homeless, lived on the streets, struggled with addiction of her own, had 2 children. Oh, shoot, sorry, here we go. Why do you think she was obtunded? I had to ask her because to me, it looked like she was intoxicated. I learned that for the past couple months, she continues to have nightmares every night of the rape she suffered from and can't sleep. That would make anybody tired. And this really goes to support what Candace was talking about, missing Indigenous women, all of those things seem to contribute to this person. This is one of the common, unfortunate themes of in American Indian country. The amount of trauma suffered by these American Indians nationally is staggering. I often ask myself, and have asked myself, I'm from this community, I'm quite aware of many community members suffering from similar problems. And so a question, even before I went to med school, even when I was growing up, I was always, my grandpa was grandma and grandpa were Vernon and Nancy Lane. My grandpa was a prominent Indian activist. You know, he had his obituary in Seattle Times. And so he's quite prominent. And he's always talked about this with me, not about necessarily the trauma, but about all the barriers we face as a tribal nation. And I kept asking myself, going through my educational experience, my professional experience, why is this story so common? Why does this trauma manifest in the form of addiction? And to get there and to get a better understanding, we need to understand how we got to where we are today. And that starts with the founding of this country. You can see this is a great picture. And I think, if I recall, I think for many of you, during your high school history class, you learned about manifest destiny. There was this belief in God, capitalism, democracy. You can see in this picture here, you have, you know, capitalism, democracy in the form of this angel. And you have it's really light. You have the trains, you have the settlers, you have farmers. And then just off in the little corner here, you have the buffalo running away. You have the tribal people being pushed off. And that was this belief by American settlers that it was our God-given right to settle this land, to tame this land. And you'll see that tribal nations were also needed to be tamed. But instead of, a lot of times they allowed disease to at least decimate our population, but they also, the federal government recognized initially in the beginning that they didn't have the numbers to move us off the land. So they also focused on treaties. I mean, if you think about it, right, think about when you go into an unknown country, unknown land, you don't know where things are, but the people who are from the land know where everything is. They know how to work the land, they know where to find food. And so the federal government felt that it was in the interest to negotiate treaties. And part of the treaties involved saying, you know, you settle in this land here, which they called reservations. And in return, the majority of the treaties agreed to provide for education, health, and well-being of the tribes. And they also recognized us as sovereign nations. In other words, we're not, you know, we're basically a nation within a nation. And so by recognizing each tribe as sovereign nations, it kind of gives us, sets tribes as political entities distinct political entities that can negotiate with the federal government. Not even the states can negotiate with the federal government. So we have a lot more political power that was given to us when we ceded our land and we did these treaties. You can see this treaty was, I believe, the first treaty, June 1744, with the Indians and Six Nations, basically that formed the province of Pennsylvania. So this started really early. A little bit more local, the Treaty of Point Elliott in 1855, we signed the treaty agreeing to move to 1,500 acres on this reservation. It was supposed to be for Nooksack and Lummi, but if you know anything about tribes, we are very proud people, and asking one tribe to move in with another tribe is a big ask. And so Nooksack and Samish refused to move here, which I don't blame them. And to give you an idea and this was 1855, by this point, we had already suffered significantly from disease. In 1909, a census documented that there was only 430 Lummi tribal members on the reservation. We were almost extinct. And so the trauma, federal policies and trauma started early. You can see, the Pennsylvania treaties, that was just the start. It wasn't forced. There was an agreement on how to share the land. And then it became more insidious by the federal government because the non-tribal people also just looked greedily at the land that was not theirs. And they started with you guys have heard the Trail of Tears, the Indian Removal Act, which essentially allowed the federal government to push or directed the federal government to push tribes west of the Mississippi so that farmers could take the land. And you can see this was a big deal, so now it basically formed the Indian Territory, which eventually became Oklahoma. And while there's a long history of it, I think it's worth highlighting that part of the strategy in Indian country and a lot of the treaties was education. And they moved us off the land, and then they decided, the federal government, they decided that it was important to educate the children so that they could be farmers or thrive in white man's world. And the best way to sum it up is this famous saying, kill the Indian, save the man. And essentially, you can see in this dramatic picture here, you have these amazing children in their regalia, and shortly after their stay there, you can see what became of them and what was forced upon them. They cut their hair, they removed all the regalia, and is now starting to become, or has been well documented, at least in the literature, but already known by our elders in our oral history. This was ultimately, an emotionally and physically and sexually abusive area. I mean, you think that this is a long time ago, that the federal government did this a long time ago and doesn't do this anymore. We still use, I say we, myself included, because we're American citizens of the federal government, we still had our government separate children at the border not too long ago. And, this is not new. This is not a new strategy when they separated children from the border. This was a well-practiced strategy. Unfortunately, it was initially started on American Indians. It wasn't until 1978, the Indian Child Welfare Act allowed parents to decline to send their children to school. 1978. My dad was born in 1960. And so many of us on this call, have parents who were around that time, or hopefully still around, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't that long ago. And the question I always ask, so here we are, we have this, I did this brief history, we had the land taken away, but not only to take the land away, the federal government decided, hey, you know what, we're just going to take the children and we're going to educate them. This has made the news recently, particularly in Canada. This is from the New York Times. They show all of these, in this case, First Nations children who were at a school. I believe this was near Kamloops, Kelowna, if I remember correctly. And it's astounding, like just stunning, tragic. I don't even know how to describe it. In Canada, they found, in this particular case, they note 751 unmarked graves. I can tell you, as a community, this hit even Lummi, even though we're not necessarily from or send kids to these Canadian schools. This hit us like literally in the gut, because these children had probably a life of hell, forcibly removed at the age of 4 and older, cut their hair, can't see their parents, abused by the people who ran the schools. It's just terrible. And the only reason why Canada is doing this is because the strong advocacy by First Nations and the agreement by the Canadian government to pay to look for these graves. The United States has not done that. And just like when you order, as a provider, when you order x-rays or imaging without knowing what you're looking for or hoping to look for, when you go looking for something, you'll find it. And the same thing, this is, looking for these graves is no different. And so here in the United States, there was, I think 60 boarding schools, if I remember correctly. And they did over 150,000, at least they document 150,000 kids who've gone through it. This is not that far from here at Lummi. I went to a funeral of an elder, and I never will ever, well, anyways, I'll just continue. I learned that as a Lummi child, she was playing on Nooksack, and I put a picture, I think that's the south or north fork of Nooksack. It's what it used to look like before farming and logging kind of affected the river. She was playing, Whatcom County Sheriff found her, kidnapped her, and placed her in a residential school. And the law was on the sheriff's side. She never actually spoke of these experiences other than the story I just told. She ended up coming back to her community in her 50s, and a well-known leader, and often spoke of the importance of getting an education. And this is actually a very common thing that happens. I have asked many elders about their residential school treatments. And just like the World War II veterans who came back and didn't talk of their experience, this generation and this group of people was no different. They would quietly, they would go stoic, their demeanor would change, and they would just say, let's talk about something else. I think someone's drawing on my graph, that's not me. Anyways, and when I talk to elders, they always shut down. They never tell me about their experience, but they would, just by their very demeanor, tells me that they experiencing something unimaginable. And I encourage, all of you on this, if you want to know, it's now, if you want to go ahead and look it up in New York Times, look at the Canadians, and there are people who are speaking out about it. And it is absolutely horrifying. Okay. So you can see that we have a significant traumatic history already setting us up. And it wasn't that long ago. 1978 was when people were finally able to, or tribes were finally able to determine where to send their children. Lummi, it's so weird. I think someone, okay. Lummi tribe and culture. I'm going to shift gears a little bit. I kind of talked about a little about the federal policies and how it impacted us just briefly. I do want to jump in. Our tribe and culture is still thriving. We have been here and will continue to be here, as Candace Wilson had said. So many people always, I don't know, they probably don't realize that there's, I think, 24 tribes in Washington state. All of these tribes have negotiated treaties with the federal government. And you can see that Bellingham, you guys all know where Bellingham is, and of course, Lummi Reservation, which is right here. And we continue to have a culturally rich tribe. The man on the far right here is the late Chief Bill James, who recently passed away a year ago, not from COVID, just from ripe, healthy old age. The man in the bottom is our chairman, Lawrence Solomon. He's one of he's the Black Hawk singer. And then, of course, just above in the top middle picture is Black Hawk singer and dancers. We continue to have a thriving community. I don't know, I'm sorry, I can't figure out how to delete. I don't know who drew on my presentation, but it's still there. So again, that's Bellingham Bay. There's some dancers that are there. Our biggest economy besides casino is fireworks and fishing. I grew up doing fireworks right on Slater and Ferndale Road. We used to be Big Thunder Fireworks. That's now where Lummi Boom City is, if you guys buy fireworks from there. My grandpa had a fireworks stand and I used to sell fireworks. I always would ask not to get paid in cash, but get paid in fireworks. I still have all my fingers, although there were definitely times I could have blown them off. And you see here is on the lower right is the fishing. I also grew up fishing on a purse seiner in my dad's boat all over the Sound. And unfortunately, the fishing is not as good as it used to be. And I recognize that, and that's when I went to school. This is the canoe races. These are the war canoes. You can see they're nice and skinny and ready to tip over, but they're designed that way if you've got good balance, because you could rush in real quickly with your canoe and attack your opponent. And of course, now we don't do that, but we do have war canoe races. And every June before the pandemic, we would have Stommish, which has been open to all. Canoe racing is an amazing, it's an addictive sport, and it's also a fun one. It can get pretty vicious out there too. And finally, this is myself and my wife. We got married, both, believe it or not, the Catholic way, as well as the traditional Lummi Squai Choir way. And this was at our community center at Requiem. Traditional foods, I think many of you are familiar with it, but it's always nice. Food is also very much tied with our culture. When the tide is out, the plate is set. You can see we have the salmon on salmon steaks, and this is how we have always cooked salmon. And it sits kind of in an upright fashion. These are yellow cedar sticks that kind of hold all the salmon. Of course, Dungeness crab, which is always available. We have the Lummi community, as well as the rest of Indian country, has been slowly rebuilding its culture from all of those, after having it almost wiped out by residential schools. There is a canoe journey every year, although last year was the first year it wasn't held. Will be interesting to see. Last year and this year is the first time we haven't held it in 20 plus years. But in 2019, Lummi hosted it. And it's a really cool thing, and I can't wait to have my kids do it. But essentially, one of these Puget Sound tribes that go even all the way up to Alaska or Canada agree to host a canoe journey. And essentially, all of the coastal tribes, the Coast Salish, all paddle to the host tribe. And then the host tribe celebrates their culture, their traditions. They allow the celebration of other tribes. For example, this is a picture of they have the list Kitakia, which I believe is in Alaska. Maybe Candace can correct me if I'm wrong, but nonetheless, they literally paddle, and then from their tribe all the way to the host tribe. When they arrive, they have to announce themselves and their tribe and request permission to come on board. Did you want to say something, Candace?
Yes, I would love to share a little bit about the canoe journey. And this picture here, it looks like the landing and when they ask for permission to come ashore. So whoever the host destination is, these people right here are asking the the tribe for permission to come ashore. And they're usually a respected elder, tribal leader. Ours was Chief Salik. He shared that with you recently. But when we hosted this in 2019, it was a fiscally sponsored account by the Lactamish Foundation, as well as in 2007. So these are some of the teachings that we had to reteach ourselves because we weren't allowed to practice this. So most recently, I believe in the 70s, our relative Oliver, his last name's Oliver, he's the one that brought it back to our communities. And we were fortunate and blessed to be able to host it in 2007 and then once again in 2019. And both times we've had approximately from 85 canoe families up to over 100, maybe 111 canoe families. So each of those consist of the people that travel on the journey that are pulling, as you see there. Then there's a crew, a safety crew that follows along just to make sure that they are all safe and hydrated and they don't tip or they don't come across difficult weather. And then there's a land crew. So a campsite, they'll arrive and get the campsite ready and meals prepared and the belongings for showers and everything. So we believe we had well over 10,000 people on our shores at the Stomach grounds at Lummi. And it was, it's always a joyous event. And because we get to celebrate song and dance and story and be with one another. Thank you.
Thanks, Candace. So you can see that, as Candace has mentioned, all of the tribes are working to rebuild what the federal government and the residential schools tried to tear down. And then that brings me to, I'm going to shift gears a little bit to the opioid crisis. The opioid crisis in Lummi, and I would say by extension in American Indian country, is this a product of historical trauma? Let's just review some of the things I presented. The federal government forcibly removed Indian children from their families, provided education to succeed in a white man's world. And of course, education is in quotes here. What do you think happened to those children when they graduated? The government just put them through unimaginable horrors and then decided, okay, now you're ready, go back and be good citizens. Oh yeah, here we go. Okay. Well, let's take a closer look. As Candace has mentioned, these is our internal data here at Lummi. From 2018 to 2021, we keep track of fatal and non-fatal overdoses. In 2018, you can see we had 51 non-fatal, unfortunately 8 deaths. 2019, similar, we reduced the non-fatal, or sorry, just not as many non-fatal. 2020, the beginning of the pandemic, we see an increase in non-fatal overdoses. Maybe, looks like about the same fatal overdoses. 2021, we're about halfway through the year, maybe actually a little over halfway through the year, and you can see that we're basically on par with the opioid overdoses. I am with opioid overdoses, I think, or opioid addiction. I think opioid addiction is probably one of the most, from an academic perspective, the most interesting thing to study, because not only is it a medical issue, it's also a social issue, it's also a family issue, it's also a society issue. And so, it can't just be only medical. And I think we can show you why shortly. My colleague, Dr. Justin Iwasaki, he was previously the medical director here at the clinic, and then decided to step down and as the medical director, and now as a physician here. He, along with the clinic, applied for a CDC grant to study the opioid crisis in Lummi. This is Dr. Iwasaki here. That's me. We're actually at a vaccine event this past year. And he said something in the very beginning that I think is actually quite on point. Just like a heart attack can be attributed to a specific sequence of, this is supposed to be of life events, opioid addiction is no different. In other words, all of us here on this call, on this Zoom call, when we hear heart attack, I think at least for the providers, nurses, probably can recognize that when a person arrives at the hospital for a heart attack, for a treatment of a heart attack, all of us understand that it is a lifetime of events that led to this one event. And I mean, early on as a child, did they, how was their childhood lifestyle? Did they eat poor diet? Did they eat unhealthy diet, healthy diet? By the time they hit high school, how active were they with sports? Shortly thereafter, did they develop smoking, alcohol? Did they become sedentary at midlife? All of those life choices led to this one event of this heart attack. And then, of course, they have these very distinct protocols for when you have a heart attack. You want to be seen at least within 90 minutes. At least the cardiac cath, on the cardiac cath table within 90 minutes. And then, because you know what, time is, what's that saying? I want to say time is brain, but forgive me. Nonetheless, the faster we act on this heart attack, the faster we act on signs of heart attack, the faster we save lives. And I would argue, and he's the one that quite point this out, is that opioid addiction is no different. But how do we think about this? I think instinctively, all of us, when we see an addict or someone in psychosis or someone arriving at PeaceHealth, they're already in crisis. And there were a bunch of things that led to that one moment. And we say, well, they had a bad childhood, or, hey, you know what, they chose to use drugs, which is true to some extent. But just like a heart attack person chose to smoke or chose to not exercise and become sedentary, or chose to not take a statin, I don't see any difference between those lifestyle changes, to be honest, because the point of these treatments is to save lives. So Lummi and its council recognized early on, or at least recently, that one of the biggest issues with people recovering from addiction is housing. And Lummi decided to build this almost safe houses for those who have recovered, and also are willing to agree to strict protocols from urine drug screens, not have visitors stay longer than 2 days. Every visitor who comes to the house, to this development, needs to sign in and declare themselves. This Shlangen is right next to our on Quina, just down the road from our clinic. And so what Dr. Iwasaki did is that he went to this village, the development, identified some volunteers who are willing to share their life story. And he asked them to share it with this particular journey to recovery and wellness map. Very simple. You see this arrow above the line. He asks these participants to put down things that help them to get to where they were. In other words, let me back up here. Actually, I don't think I made myself clear. When these recovered addicts arrive at Shlangen Village, they are fully recovered. They're staying in these homes and they're trying to get their lives back together. And we wanted to know how they were able to do it. And we also wanted to understand their life story, because by asking them, we could then start to develop a model that would help us understand how to support them better. So we created a simple, he created a simple thing. This line, the beginning of the line represents the beginning of your life. The end of your line represents Shlangen Village today. Now that they're in Shlangen Village, here they are. Above the line, they were asked to write things that helped get them to sobriety. And below the line, they asked to document things that prevented them from getting to sobriety in Shlangen Village. And here are some of the results. So in this particular case, this person noted 1994, started smoking and drinking. 1996, first time went to inpatient treatment. Graduated high school in 1999. So 1999, they graduated high school, but the first interaction was for treatment was 1996. 1994, they started smoking and drinking. So you're looking at an 11, 12-year-old. Got the first job in 2002, had the first child in 2003, second child, which led me to start using pills in 2005, went to jail, CPS got involved. 6 months in another inpatient treatment, started the Suboxone program, which helped him stabilize, went to college, weaned off Suboxone and started drinking again. Moved to Yakima, relapsed on pills, CPS involved again. Suboxone the second time around in 2013, CPS case closed, got 2 out of 3 children back, got a job at casino. 2015, CPS back involved. 8 months later, case closed, but still has 1 child in CPS. And now she's living in Shlangen Village, trying to get her life back together. Here's another one. You can see sports played a very positive role until about the age of 15 and 16. At the age of 16, first time drinking and smoking. 18, high school graduation. First charge ever for selling weed at high school. And then at 19, started lifestyle with hard drugs. 20, full-blown opiate addiction. 24, selling, looks like selling street drugs. 26 says busted, presumably in jail. Also had his first child. 28, it looks like, change of heart and mind, went to treatment. Sorry, my Zoom is here. At age of 29, released, got a job, had a second child by 31, intern as an apprentice program. Now he's at Shlangen Village trying to recover. Here's the one more, just bear with me. 1999, Cheyenne, I'm not sure what she's referring to, or he or she's referring to. 2000, went to prison. 2008, Justina, maybe that's her child, multiple jail times down here on the bottom, took pills, heroin, and meth. She put drug court counselors and Suboxone and Subutex as a positive thing. And she had family as a positive thing. And she's here today. So after further analysis, those are just some of them. I think it's important to share the stories. You can see common themes. Let me just back up 1 second. You can see some sort of childhood event, traumatic event, the use of substances, drinking, pills, whatever. Then at some point getting busted and going to jail. All those stories went to jail. And then trying to get out of jail and restart their lives. Often children taken away from them. And so a further analysis of this, adults with ACE score of 4 or more were 11 times more likely to inject drugs during their lifetime. So for those of you unfamiliar with ACE, it stands for Adverse Childhood Events. It's a simple quiz. I include the link here in the presentation. NPR has a great ACE calculator with explanations. And they kind of ask questions similar to, did your parent ever hit you? Did you ever feel abandoned? At any point, did you ever, I'm butchering the questions here, but you get the general idea. If you answer yes to 4 or more, then you have all of these downstream outcomes, downstream health outcomes. In this particular case, we discovered that they're more likely to inject drugs. So, and I want you to recall that we had Lummi in Indian country had all of our children taken away as early as 1860, and it ended 1978. So many of our elders who are still around today, we love them, and we also need to recognize the amount of horror and trauma they went through, and then how they led us to all of this amazing culture we have now. So now think of all of the childhood trauma that these elders went through. And so it's almost carried down. The historical trauma continues to carry down. And Dr. Iwasaki looked at all of these feedback and this data from the patients and developed this model. And I think once you see it, you can't unsee it. And let me describe what this is. It basically allows visual representation of the cycle. We have the blue, which is the substance use as a medical problem. We have the yellow, which is when substance use as a community problem. And then we also have various stages in the life of addiction. And this, keep in mind, this is modeled after what we, Indian country, but it's not that much of a stretch to see this as a function of all of the opioid crises that various communities are experiencing. First, it starts with some adverse childhood experience, leads to teen drug use, leaving high school, unplanned pregnancies. Sometimes because of the drug use, the CPS will move the child. Then inevitably it leads to a drug-related crime, and that's when they get arrested. In jail, they get exposed to criminality, and once they leave jail, it's pretty hard to find a good paying job if you have that record. So you have a higher risk of unemployment, and then when you get frustrated, so then you revert back to criminal activity, and to fund your substance use if you're having addiction issues. Of course, unemployment leads to an extension of family trauma with all the family that you're interacting with. It leads to housing insecurity. If someone has a record, it's hard, landlords may not be willing to rent to you. And also you need social services. And it contributes, back down to community trauma. And so when Dr. Iwasaki presented this to me, it was kind of like, well, duh, this makes sense. And it kind of puts into perspective where on this, model can either you as an individual or you as a community or you as a government can make some policy changes to help, I guess, help these people to recovery. Obviously, jail is a huge barrier to recovery. Um, and you see that now coming out in a lot of federal policy discussions, the decriminalization of marijuana, um, and in some circles, they're starting to decriminalize any drugs for that matter, because once you end up in jail, it's really hard to get a job. It's really hard to be productive citizens. And when you think about it, using drugs in the private of your home is not really, you're harming yourself. Yeah, you would argue, but I don't think it's, in many ways, it's no different than all of us who drink alcohol in our private home or smoke cigarettes in our private home. Um, it's 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 we used to jail people back in the Prohibition era, but then we discovered that it doesn't really work. It creates a lot of downstream problems for the community. I would argue that street drugs are no different. And so there are many models. Portugal also kind of advocated this model of harm reduction. And soon as you have a substance use, instead of being arrested, you're automatically brought into mental health treatment. And if you look at, if I go back, all of them put drug courts, counselors, Suboxone, Subutex. This one put intern apprentice program, so he got a good job. This one put, and these are all in the positive, right? So this one put Suboxone program as a positive, Suboxone as a positive, going to college as a positive, getting a job at the casino, so a good job. All of those were in the positive. And all of the negative was things like CPS getting involved. I'm not saying we should get rid of CPS. I'm just saying that, those things can have negative impacts. So let's go back here. And let me see. Okay. So, but when you look at the start of this whole chain of events, just like a heart attack, adverse childhood experiences are what lead to many of these downstream effects, at least by the model that he developed. And I think this is something that we have to focus. So the most important thing is to focus on the main cause. And so that is one area that at least our clinic here at Lummi is starting to focus on and reducing. And so I did want to jump into Indian healthcare. I'm going to shift gears a little bit. This model, I think we got maybe 10 more slides, and then I'll let questions come up. I see some questions coming up, so give me about 10 more minutes, and then we'll jump into questions. Real quick, Indian healthcare. So back to the 50,000-foot view. Indian Health Service was created to provide healthcare for tribes. The federal government never fully funded, and in fact, for Indian healthcare, as of 2013, they gave roughly $1,900 for each tribal member. That's compared to federal prisoners, which got better care than tribal members, or at least not better care, more funding, $3,800. So how do you expect to have a healthy population? Of course, Medicare has higher. This was recognized as a problem in 2010. They did the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act, which was bundled in with the Affordable Care Act. It allowed for third-party billing. So now our clinic is able to bill, in addition to receiving funds from Indian Health Service, able to bill Medicare, Medicaid. This has allowed our clinic to actually grow and provide enough doctors to support the needs of the community. We've grown from 2 doctors, and by the end of this year, we'll have 10 doctors. We'll also have 3 physical therapists, 7 dentists, 2 pharmacists. And so we have a lot of medical needs. Did that fix the problem of underfunding? Not necessarily. Still, you can see in 2015, 5 years after Obamacare, Indian Health Service continues to be underfunded. For medical, it's about $3,100 per tribal member. For Medicaid, that's less than Medicaid, less than what the VA they spend on the VA, and then the national healthcare spending per American citizen. Then, of course, Medicare spending. So we still have Indian Health Service is still underfunded. We recognize, I hope I've shown, the social detriments of healthcare kind of informally with those stories of the 3 patients. They need economic stability, education, healthcare, and then the neighborhood they're live in. Oh, I kind of jumped. Here's our clinic. We offer psychiatric, pediatric, family medicine, internal medicine, physical therapy, behavioral health, Suboxone, and of course, public health, which I haven't really touched upon in the light of COVID. We have, as I noted earlier, Dr. Iwasaki highlighted the base adverse childhood events. So we've reoriented a lot of our clinic to kind of do our best to minimize adverse childhood events. We try to meet patients where they are. We have a school-based medical clinic run by our pediatrician, which offers medical and dentists at the school. We have mental health professionals there. We also have home visiting services for frail elders. We allow for same-day walk-in. As mentioned, this is a couple years outdated, but it does show that we really made an effort to reduce teenage pregnancy, given the significant adverse, not outcomes, but the long-term outcomes that come from having children when you're young. We put a huge emphasis on long-acting reversible contraceptives, or LARC. That's like Nexplanon, IUDs, Depo-Provera shot. And you can see that we did reduce the pre-pandemic, we did reduce the teenage pregnancy. Unfortunately, we had a little bit of spike because of COVID, and many, we focused so much on COVID that we weren't able to provide these as much healthcare delivery to our children and young women. Okay, let me see. All right. So I hope I've demonstrated that the federal policies from the late 1800s to early 1900s really set the stage for what our community is facing today. The residential schools contributed to an increased ACE within our community, which then led to worsening addictions. And a few last minute statements. This is health equity. I know many of you are asking, what can you do as an individual? I want to be clear. I'm not blaming anyone on this call for all the things that happened to Lummi or American Indians. I'm merely trying to demonstrate that our community has undergone a significant level of trauma. And all I'm asking is that that when you see, a American Indian patient, when you see someone with addiction, all I'm asking, I continue to deal with patients with addiction. They are really tough patients. We reflectively want, sometimes those patients are mean to us. They scream at us, they cuss at us, they don't listen to us. And I'm not, it shouldn't surprise you given what life has thrown at them. And all I'm asking is for you to build your empathy. I'm not excusing, the addict's behavior. All I'm asking is that you have more empathy. Certainly hold people who are suffering from addiction, hold them accountable. So avoid prejudging patients. The other one, and I said this maybe 6 months ago on another PeaceHealth Zoom call, take the time to sit down, even if it's 30 seconds, you'll learn a lot more. And then I would ask that you recall that mental health model that I just showed, not the mental health model, but this, well, I'll get to it later, but that model of addiction and how it occurs in a community. When government policies that you could consider, when the time comes, and it's already, many times it's being posed to us as an American citizen, supporting decriminalization of drugs, supporting harm reduction, support good paying jobs. And I mean, when I say good paying jobs, I'm not referring to the people on this call. I'm actually referring to people who are at the lowest rungs of our society. People who suddenly became essential workers during COVID-19 because we needed them to clean our facility. We needed them to deliver food to us by Uber. We need to make sure that they have good paying jobs. And that doesn't mean 2 jobs here, 3 jobs there, kind of hodgepodge together. It just means, we need to have it. Support affordable housing, that's obviously a difficult one, but certainly a goal that we should all be aiming towards. I think many of us here have been trying to buy houses in this housing market, and it's been extremely frustrating. And so, a move to increase housing inventory is important. And some final thoughts. Structural racism still exists today. One of the biggest complaints that I receive from our community members is PeaceHealth treats me poorly because I'm Indian. I've heard specific stories, particularly in the era of COVID. Elders have come to me that when they went to the ER in early January, February, nurses often yelled at them, "How did you get the vaccine? That's, you're going, how did you get it before everyone else?" And they were like, "I don't know, it was available at Lummi." And, our clinic did a great job in getting vaccines readily available. And so, they made them feel bad for getting vaccines. Go figure. This picture right here is Jim Scott. He's the first Lummi elder, first Lummi and our elder who got vaccinated December 17th of last year. So, okay, wait, oops, almost done. One last thing, I just got to highlight the policies from 100 years ago continue to affect us today. Boynton Road. How many of you heard the Boynton Poetry Contest? Boynton was also of that family. I think the Boynton poetry is based off of a female, Sue Boynton. This one was Dr. Boynton, who was a male physician who served as an Indian Health Service provider. He was a homeopathic doctor, not even a real doctor, if you know what I mean. And he, in order to provide healthcare federally, in our treaty, he was supposed to provide healthcare. He wouldn't provide it to them unless they signed over their land, the title to the land within the reservation. And thanks to the Dawes Act of the federal government, they basically allowed that, the federal government allowed that to happen. Here's a picture of the Lummi Reservation. And you can see this is Bellingham Bay. Bellingham sits kind of right over here. This is Sandy Point. And these arrows are pointing to very nice developments. One is here, Gooseberry Point. Boynton Road is right here. I think it's somewhere here. I think it might be that one, Boynton Road. It's a Boynton development. Then, of course, there's the wealthy Sandy Point. But what's weird is, how did they get in Lummi Reservation? And you have to ask yourself if, things like what Dr. Boynton did was required tribal members to sign over the title of the land to receive our federally treaty that promised us healthcare. This same person used their privilege and power to make us sign over various titles of the land. Not only that, when he sold it off, of course, the non-tribal members who bought the land wanted to develop it. So And to develop it, they went to Bellingham and said, hey, we need water and sewer. And Bellingham said, sure. So they gave water and sewer, and they ran water and sewer all the way out here, ran water and sewer all the way along here, and ran water and sewer all the way here. Did they provide water and sewer to any tribal members? Unfortunately not. And in fact, today we still have tribal members who do not have water and do not have sewer. And so these, you know, you speak to the people who bought the land here, they're now, the land title has changed so much, it's you know, it's now part of Whatcom County, but here they are. Are they part of Lummi community? Do they care about Lummi community? Generally not. There was a house that was sold for $1.2 million here. This in a community that has, you know, 80% are struggling or qualify for Medicare, Medicaid. I share this because these are the things that we see, Lummi sees every day. And then when we arrive at Peace Health, we've really been sold the short end of the stick on a lot of things. And I just ask that you recognize this, empathize with it. You know, I don't blame the people who bought this property because I actually blame the federal government for allowing and encouraging this to happen. So now we still face it today. And so we have some land policies, you know, we have the residential schools, and then is it any surprise that many of us are unfortunately suffering from addiction? And I think we have about 20 minutes, if I understand. I'd like to open it up to questions, comments, and just as a last statement, the people on this call, I'm not blaming anyone for these problems. I'm just describing the historical connections that led to us to where we are today. And I just ask for that you guys be thoughtful and empathize when you see a tribal member come into your care. And with that, thank you for your time, and I'd like to open it up for questions, comments.
Thank you, Dr. Lane. We'll probably read, there's a couple questions in the comment box. We'll kind of read some of them out loud since not everyone can see the comment box or people who have called in. Terry, you want to go ahead?
Yeah. Would you also say that since there hasn't been proper funding to healthcare and social support, that people have turned to drugs to self-medicate?
I mean, that's the point of this model, right? So you have this adverse childhood event, traumatic, and human beings are creatures of habit. And when you have such a traumatic history, like nightmares at night, and you can't sleep, you would do anything to help those nightmares go away. And unfortunately, with drugs, it helps do that. Alcohol and, you know, opioids. So yeah, I think that's part of it. Yes.
We had a couple good comments too. There was a good one when you mentioned your quote about just like a heart attack, it can be attributed to a specific sequence of events. Opioid addiction is no different. Brenda said, you know, like time is like a muscle.
That's it. That's it.
Yeah.
Thank you. I was thinking time is brain, which is stroke, but time is muscle, is the heart attack. That's correct.
Yeah. Someone else kind of asked when you were talking about the history of Native children getting forcibly removed from their families and put in boarding schools, if there were any other resources to kind of read about that history and or information kind of pertaining to that trauma that has happened to First Nations people.
One,
Just off the top of your head,
yeah,
if you know.
so there's one that I think is called, I believe, Ironheart or Iron Horse, which is a Netflix show about a Canadian hockey player. It's a fictional, it's based on a fictional story, but it combines a lot of the traumas of it shows some of the traumas that were faced by children at residential school, and it's pretty horrifying. Um, just and it's almost there's it's this show. I think many of you are familiar with the movie Schindler's List, and you watch it and it's horrifying. You can't even believe people did things like that. This Netflix show is evoked a similar emotion. The fact that a group in position of power did this to a group who had no power, and we still see the effects today. So that's one. I do believe there's a lot of academic literature. It doesn't take much, just to Google. I think New York Times had a few great articles, residential schools. BBC had a few. And I think the First Nations Canadian First Nations also has some literature. They're doing extensive research that's funded by the Canadian government.
Another question, Dr. Lane, is they're curious, William's curious if you've seen lower rates of addiction in the younger generations yet. Unfortunately
not. We see about the same rate. This fentanyl that's in the fentanyl is really changing the game. First it was like oxys. Now fentanyl is like this insane amount. I just had a patient come in yesterday and mention he's taking 30 pills a day. And Indian Horse, thank you. Rachel Lucy put it in the chat box. Indian Horse is the name of the Netflix movie. But back to fentanyl, this particular individual came in for Suboxone, or Subutex treatment. Unfortunately, I don't even think the max dose of Subutex would be able to keep this patient from withdrawing and reverting back to street drugs. Because, and the UDS was only positive for fentanyl. It's no heroin, morphine or methamphetamine. It was just fentanyl. I think a lot of the providers on here are quite familiar with how powerful fentanyl is, but it's like, 10,000 times more powerful than heroin. So a lot of addicts I'm treating now don't even need needles. They'd rather just take pills because they get fentanyl. And it has such a short half-life that you can't. You have to take more pills to continue the fix or also prevent withdrawal.
Another question, Dr. Lane, is are there, or maybe for Candace as well, are there any volunteer opportunities that we could participate in to contribute to assisting the Lummi Nation in any way?
I will say our clinic always has availability for volunteers, depending on what their interests are. We often have Western students, UW students. We also have med students. When we have big events, sometimes there's opportunities for volunteer. When we did the vaccine events here at Lummi, we had a lot of volunteer nursing staff come out. I don't know, do you want to add anything else, Candace?
Candace is no longer on.
Oh,
No.
great.
Oh.
I'm still here.
Oh, yay, she's here.
Yes, there's always ways to volunteer at Lummi Nation in one form or another, from the schools or the college, the clinic, as Doctor had mentioned, internships possibly. But the best way to be able to find that out is to come and visit us. So when we have community events going on, you're more than welcome to attend and witness and participate if you feel moved to do so. My father always told me, if you hear about it, you're invited. That's our way of life. So there's no, sometimes there's no formal invitation, but when you do hear or see events going on, I extend that recommendation to you as well. As I reflect on Dr. Dakota's presentation today, I wanted to add a few things, if now is okay, or shall we go through some more questions?
I think now is a great time to go through a couple things if you would like.
Okay, thank you. So the stories that Doctor shared with you about the patients and their lifeline, their journey. My story, myself, I'm a family of 9. I'm the 5th child, and I am the only child to graduate with a high school diploma, to walk at graduation. And my family have been faced with diabetes. My sister had passed away at the age of 45 with type 1 diabetes. And most recently, my younger brother passed away to type 2. And all of the Indian policy that Doctor talks about has impacted us in one way or another, because it's not just generational trauma, it's the intergenerational, and I cannot think of the other word that I want to say right now, but I do have a few things I'd like to share and contribute to this conversation, if I may share the screen. Would that be possible? And I know this is unexpected, but I felt it was really important to share this picture of a few things. And I can send this to you after, Rachel.
Candace, we're making you co-host, so hopefully Vanessa's got you covered, and we'd love to
It's
have
done.
you.
So this one right here, this is a timeline of federal Indian policy. It begins back in 1832. This is what we have recorded, and most recent as 2009. It is a huge, like, printed copy is about 10 feet long. So this, the way you see it, is actually like a termination policy of the Indigenous people in one way or another, whether it's rulemaking or through the Court of Appeals of the United States government. And then want to share one more thing. So I don't know what you're seeing right now. Okay, let me try it again. One more screen. Okay, so this here is the Native Transformation Project. And this was research conducted by Indigenous people from Dr. Stacy Rasmus and our team here at Lummi in the Pacific Northwest. I believe there were 3 other tribes involved in this, but this is the Native Transformation. There's a whole booklet on this, and it talks about our strengths and our resilience as Indigenous people. And here are some really important items to keep in mind: the Coast Salish protective factors, and what we see and what we feel and what we know are our protective factors from our family sources of strength, community sources of strength, individual sources of strength, and the spiritual sources of strength. These help us to stay well, but we know all of those detriments of health that Dr. Dakota had spoken to earlier, from homes to housing security, food and shelter, um, helping others, working, and then the teachings, the schooling, and traditional highways, which are our canoes, whether we're racing or the canoe journey. And then our wellness, it's about health and wellness. It's not just about medical health. It's really important to keep in mind for the mental, the social, emotional health. And then this last one, this is the reef net model, that we identify all of those teachings and what is important to us in our way of life and how it's anchored there, and how the reef net model captures the salmon, and the two canoes at the top there are monitoring and filling the catch with the salmon, which used to be in abundance. But this Native Transformation Project was most recently done within the last 10 years. And what we're trying to do is to adapt this for a children's model so we can communicate and share this to our children in their way, in their knowing and understanding. And a couple other things when Dr. Dakota talks about the fact that we don't want anyone to feel shame or guilty, but we just want you to know the truth, to learn the truth. And you can help by doing that in so many ways, not just by being present and welcome to our community events, but to help support the since time immemorial curriculum in our public schools, whether it's Ferndale or Bellingham or wherever you are at, whatever school district you are in, to help and ask the school board directors what they are doing to help make sure that the schools have the information available. So the Since Time Immemorial is designed to work with the local area tribes for the resources available. And we are still doing that. We recently adopted the land acknowledgement statement by resolution from the Lummi Indian Business Council. And I do have that on our homepage at lactamish.org. The Lactamish land acknowledgement statement and some resources for you as well. So those are a couple things that you can do to help. And I wanted to share with you about that, not knowing and not feeling bad about knowing the history of the Indigenous people, because American history begins with Native history. And the late Chief Salik, he was known as the People's Chief. So what that means is that he's not just our chief of Lummi Nation or the Pacific Northwest or the Indigenous people. He was all of our chief. He taught us the most that he could, a Stevenson. But what he told us, the fact that you don't know your language is not your fault. It's not your parents' fault. It's not your grandparents' fault. It's nobody's fault. But the fact that you get to learn it is your choice.
Thank you, Candace.
Thank you, Candace. It looks like Dr. Lane has to leave here for a meeting, so we just wanted to wrap up.
We just want to thank everyone for attending today and really listening and participating and all the thoughtful questions in the chat. Our learning and growth doesn't end here. It's our job to continue to acknowledge the trauma and to learn how to be agents of change. Really thank you from our hearts, Dr. Lane and Candace, for your teachings and your time today.
Yes, thank you so much. And the Professional Development Council, we will send out an email with the survey to claim CEs. There's also a link in the chat window. We're excited to bring you an action-oriented session this September, October, where we'll discuss what has been presented over the past 5 sessions in a very open communication. A link for the sign up will be sent in a couple of weeks. Thank you, Dr. Lane. I did put a link in the chat box as well for the Lactamish Foundation. This is one of the programs that will be an option to donate to after you have completed the sessions and completed this action-oriented session. Will be eligible to get a donation of $100 from PeaceHealth to distribute to a list of organizations, and Lactamish Foundation will be one of those. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending.
Have a great day.